A deafening Siberian night in the late 80s. The frost is around -40 degrees. A biting icy wind drives ground snow across the endless steel ribbon of the Trans-Siberian Railway. From the impenetrable darkness emerges the silhouette of an ordinary freight train. Up front, a heavy diesel locomotive rumbles, and behind it stretches a chain of grey cars with barely legible inscriptions, refrigerator, and the logos of the USSR Ministry of Railways. To any casual passerby at a nameless wayside station, this was the most ordinary train, carrying frozen meat, butter, or fresh fish from Vladivostok to Moscow. But if an American spy could have seen through the steel skin of these cars, his breath would have been taken away by horror. Inside the sealed refrigerator compartment, shackled in hydraulic clamps, rested a 100-ton monster, an intercontinental ballistic missile with 10 independently targetable thermonuclear warheads. Each was many times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. 30 minutes after receiving a secret order, this train could turn an entire American state into radioactive ash. This was the combat railway missile system Molodets, classified by NATO as the Scalpel, the most secretive, most unpredictable, and deadliest ghost of the Cold War. For decades, American spy satellites, with optics costing billions of dollars, combed every meter of Soviet railways, trying to find those very mobile launchers among the flow of hundreds of thousands of civilian cars. Pentagon and CIA analysts racked their brains over the secret of the superweapon, while military experts in Washington fell into quiet panic. The Soviet nuclear train could be anywhere, from the snowbound forest of Kostroma and the steppes of Kazakhstan to the taiga dead ends of Transbaikalia. Officially, Soviet newspapers wrote about the success of the latest CPSU Congress, the fulfillment of the 5-year plan, and the peaceful records of railway workers. But in the wax-sealed folders stamped Top Secret, which landed on the desks of the CIA director and members of the Politburo, this train featured as the primary instrument of guaranteed retaliation. Why was the West so panicked by this train? How could the impoverished Soviet system of the late 80s create an engineering marvel without equal in the world? And why, decades later, do so many dark, intriguing, and incredible legends still surround the Molodets, from secret underground tunnel cities to ghostly duplicate trains? Today, comrades, we will walk through the labyrinths of declassified archives, open the heavy doors of abandoned bunkers, and learn the whole truth and the most thrilling secrets of the USSR's nuclear train. To understand how and why this steel ghost was born, we need to return to the era when the dense shadow of nuclear Armageddon loomed over the world. The late 60s and 70s, this was a time when the concept of mutually assured destruction became the primary guarantee of peace. Both superpowers buried thousands of missiles in highly protected silo launchers. However, American military thought did not stand still. The emergence of high-precision Minuteman III missiles and Trident submarine cruisers presented the Soviet leadership with a terrible fact. In the event of a sudden first strike by the United States, most stationary Soviet silos could be destroyed in the ground even before the operators could turn the launch keys. The Kremlin needed a weapon that could not be destroyed by a first strike because it simply could not be found. Submarines hid in the ocean, but they could be tracked by hydroacoustic systems. Mobile ground complexes on multi-axle transporters were tied to roads. And then, in the offices of the USSR Ministry of Defense, they remembered the country's main wealth and simultaneous curse: the gigantic railway network stretching over 140,000 kilometers. On January 13, 1969, a secret joint resolution of the CPSU Central Committee and the USSR Council of Ministers was issued. This document launched the development of a combat railway missile complex. The legendary Dnepropetrovsk Yuzhnoye Design Bureau, headed by academician Vladimir Fedorovich Utkin, was appointed the chief developer. However, the creation of the train itself and the unique launch systems was entrusted to his own brother, Alexei Utkin, chief designer of the Special Machine Building Design Bureau in Leningrad. This unique family and engineering tandem undertook a task that seemed absolutely impossible to their contemporaries from the perspective of the laws of physics and strength of materials. Official records and documents from that era chronicle the colossal volume of technical problems that Soviet scientists and engineers had to solve. The first and most significant problem was weight. The solid-fuel RT-23 UTT-KH missile, along with its launch container and equipment, weighed over 100 tons. Standard Soviet railway tracks were designed for a load of no more than 25 tons per axle. If such an enormous weight were concentrated in a single standard rail car, the train would simply crush the rails, destroy bridges, and sink into the ground on its very first trip. The engineers, under Alexei Utkin's leadership, had to achieve a genuine breakthrough. They developed special 8-axle rail cars and a unique load distribution system that during movement and in preparation for launch redistributed the missile's colossal mass to the train's adjacent cars. The second problem seemed even more absurd: how to launch a giant missile directly from railway tracks, above which hang contact wires carrying tens of thousands of volts. In the dry documents of Gosplan and the Ministry of Railways, this was described succinctly and strictly, but behind it lay a brilliant brainstorming effort. The designers invented a special system. Seconds before launch, an automatic manipulator would rise up, grab the contact wire, move it aside, and ground it, clearing the space for launch. The third issue was the launch itself. If the sustainer engine of the 100-ton missile were ignited directly inside the rail car or on the train's roof, the superheated gases, with temperatures of thousands of degrees, would instantly incinerate the train itself, melt the rails, and destroy the entire crew. The solution was found in the so-called mortar launch. A special powder pressure accumulator would literally shoot the missile out of its container to a height of 30 meters into the air. And only there, in the air, would special powder deviation engines ignite, pushing the missile away from the train, and only after that would the first stage engine roar to life. The missile, virtually hovering in the sky, would gain speed, heading into the stratosphere, while the train remained completely unharmed. Even the missile's length presented an insurmountable dead end. The missile did not fit within the dimensions of a standard refrigerator car. Making the car longer was impossible. It would not navigate turns and would hit platforms. So the Soviet designers came up with the incredible. They made the missile's nose cone foldable. During transport, the nozzle inserts and aerodynamic control surfaces were folded, and after being ejected from the car into the air, they unfolded like a steel bud of a deadly flower. This vast production effort unfolded under the cover of the strictest secrecy of the late stagnation era. Factories in Dnepropetrovsk, Leningrad, Kalinin, and Perm operated under the coded designations of post office boxes. Thousands of workers and engineers signed non-disclosure agreements valid for decades. Every single component, every blueprint passed through the sieve of the KGB's first directorate. On paper, for the inspecting authorities and the world public, Soviet industry was producing nothing but refrigerator cars for transporting perishable goods. In 1987, after passing severe tests at the Plesetsk test site, the BZhRK Molodets SS-24 Scalpel officially entered combat duty. The first regiments were deployed near Kostroma. Later the trains appeared in the Perm region and Krasnoyarsk Krai. Each such train consisted of 3 launch modules, meaning it carried 3 missiles, a command post car, cars for autonomous power supply, fuel tanks, and comfortable living cars for the personnel. It was a completely autonomous underground bunker on wheels, capable of roaming the country for months without refueling or resupply, ready at any second, upon a signal from the Kremlin, to stop at any point along its route, open the roofs of its cars, and deliver a devastating strike. From the point of view of dry military statistics and official documents, the USSR had created a perfect deterrent system. But while the party leadership reported on the latest victories of socialism at congresses, very different stories began to sprout in the shadow of this grand military program. However, if on paper and in official Politburo reports everything looked like a triumph of Soviet science and the planned economy, behind the curtain of secrecy, real spy passions raged and dark legends were born that still make blood run cold. When American intelligence first received fragmentary information from its agents that the Russians were building not just mobile missile launchers, but entire nuclear trains hidden under the guise of ordinary freight cars, a real panic began in Langley. American analysts understood, if this system became fully operational, their multi-billion-dollar satellite tracking system would turn into a useless pile of scrap metal. Western intelligence agencies launched unprecedented programs to search for the Soviet ghost train. Canon series satellites continuously photographed the USSR's railway junctions. But here the CIA ran into an insurmountable wall of Soviet secrecy. Externally, a BZhRK car was practically indistinguishable from a standard Rev 450 refrigerator car. It had the same grey sides, the same standard footboards, the same markings of the Ministry of Railways. The only barely noticeable differences were 8 axles instead of 4 and a reinforced roof. But discerning this from hundreds of kilometers in space through dense Siberian cloud cover was virtually impossible. And it is here, at the intersection of total Soviet secrecy and Western paranoia, that the most intriguing conspiracy theories and rumors were born, whispered about in the smoking rooms of Soviet research institutes and at the closed dachas of the nomenklatura. One of the most persistent and fascinating hypotheses claimed that the BZhRK, Molodets, traveled not only on the civilian rails of the Ministry of Railways, but used a giant network of underground railways cut through the granite of the Ural Mountains and Siberian rock. They spoke of the existence of a so-called Metro 2, not only under Moscow, but of underground arteries thousands of kilometers long, connecting secret Urals bunkers like Mount Yamantau and Chelyabinsk 70 with the country's main railway lines. According to this version, the ghost trains could remain hundreds of meters underground for years, surfacing only for controlled deployments or in the event of an actual nuclear war. In favor of this theory, conspiracy fans cited the fact that many USSR mining projects of the 70s utilized an anomalous number of metro construction workers and special equipment, and the volumes of extracted rock defied any reasonable explanation within the framework of civilian construction. Another legend, prevalent among missile officers and still debated today, is the theory of duplicate trains, or phantom trains. Rumors had it that the KGB and the Ministry of Defense created a massive disinformation system. For every real nuclear train, there were up to 10 complete fakes. These were exact copies of the BZhRK cars, loaded with concrete blocks to simulate the required weight and equipped with special thermal generators that mimicked the operation of the internal systems of the real complex. These dummy trains continuously roamed the entire territory of the Soviet Union, confusing US satellite reconnaissance and forcing the Americans to spend billions of dollars tracking false targets. American analysts were driven mad trying to calculate, based on indirect signs, rail deflection, ground vibration, and radiation, where the real complex was and where there were merely tons of concrete in grey cars. Equally grim rumors circulated about the spy war unfolding along the railway lines. Whispers suggested that the CIA, through its agents and diplomats, attempted to deploy a network of portable seismic and vibration sensors within the USSR. They were allegedly dropped from cars during foreign tourist trips on the Trans-Siberian Railway, or disguised as ordinary roadside rocks and signal posts. These sensors were supposed to detect the specific vibrational signature of the heavy 8-axle cars of the Molodets. In response, the second chief directorate of the KGB launched an unprecedented hunt. Anyone with a camera or a suspicious object near the railway track or a bridge instantly ended up in the basements of the Lubyanka or local state security departments. Legends say that entire KGB Special Forces units, disguised as mushroom pickers, hunters, and track workers, were on duty in the remote taiga, guarding the invisible routes of the nuclear trains. There was also a truly terrifying hypothesis linking the BZhRK to the legendary perimeter system of automatic guaranteed retaliatory strike, known in the West as Dead Hand. Rumors circulated that in the event of the complete destruction of the country's top leadership and central command posts in Moscow, the Molodets trains would switch to a fully autonomous mode controlled by the artificial intelligence of that era. The train's computer system, receiving data from radiation sensors, seismic tremors, and radio signals, could independently make the decision to launch missiles even if the entire train crew was dead or incapacitated. The train would transform into a twilight avenger, striding along the charred rails of a perished civilization and carrying out its final fateful order. And yet, in the corridors of defense enterprises, there was whispered talk of technological sabotage. Allegedly, American Special Services, realizing they could not detect the trains from space, tried through front companies to supply the USSR with defective microchips and chemical components for solid rocket fuel to cause spontaneous explosions or guidance system failures. Every minor malfunction on the railway or a train delay was assessed by counterintelligence not as ordinary Soviet negligence, but as a possible sabotage by enemy agents. The atmosphere of universal suspicion, closed Zato cities inaccessible without a special pass, and the whispers of communal kitchens created an impenetrable aura of mystery and fear around the Molodets. But where, in this breathtaking spy drama, does the line between fiction and harsh historical reality lie? What part of it was a brilliant mystification by Soviet propaganda and Western fear, and what part was the cruel and prosaic truth that Soviet newspapers remained silent about? If we discard the romance of spy novels and turn to the facts declassified in the 90s and the 2000s, the picture becomes even more dramatic. The harsh reality was that the BZhRK Molodets SS-24 Scalpel truly was an outstanding engineering masterpiece, but for this masterpiece, the Soviet economy and ordinary people paid a gigantic, almost unbearable price. Conspiracy theories about underground tunnels stretching across the entire Urals, of course, do not stand up to the scrutiny of drive figures and Gosplan documents. No 1,000-kilometer underground highways for missile trains existed. Carving such tunnels through granite in just a few years was beyond the capabilities of even the entire mighty Soviet construction machine. The trains did indeed run on regular Ministry of Railways tracks, but the cost of this movement was enormous. The extremely heavy missile and reinforced wagons, despite all the brilliant weight redistribution systems designed by Alexei Utkin, had a destructive effect on the rails and wooden sleepers. After the passage of the Molodets, the railway track would rapidly wear out. The rails were literally flattened, and the wooden sleepers crumbled. Railway workers, in off-the-record conversations, cursed these trains. To compensate for the damage, the Ministry of Railways had to urgently, and in a regime of the strictest secrecy, replace rails on the standard petrol routes and reinforce bridges and embankments. The paradox was that it was precisely these constant, abnormally frequent repair works on specific sections of the railway that ultimately became the very lead for American space intelligence, revealing the roots of the Soviet ghosts. The Americans simply tracked where Soviet construction crews most frequently replaced rails with heavier types, and mapped out the Molodets petrol zones. The daily life of the officers and soldiers serving on the BZhRK was also far from romantic notions. It was not a comfortable journey in a compartment. Combat duty lasted for weeks. The 70 to 80 crew members lived in a confined, vibrating steel space without windows, under artificial lighting, and to the continuous low-frequency hum of diesel generators. The psychological strain was colossal. People went for months without seeing the sun, living in a state of constant combat readiness for a nuclear apocalypse. The special rations, which included delicacies, quite good stewed meat, and even condensed milk and chocolate, which were rare for those times, could not compensate for the immense stress and feeling of isolation. Every officer understood. Their train was the #1 target for an enemy strike, and in the event of war, they would have only minutes left to live. The rumors about phantom decoy trains turned out to be half-truths. They did not build full-size concrete duplicate trains. That was too expensive even for the militarily budget-rich USSR. However, large-scale camouflage measures were indeed carried out. Wagons that externally resembled elements of the BZhRK were periodically coupled into regular freight trains to confuse visual observation, and a complex imitation of radio communications and radio traffic was created on the radio frequencies. Why did such a colossal layer of conspiracy theory arise around this train? The answer lies in the very nature of the late Soviet system. The cult of total secrecy, censorship, the absence of reliable information, and the fear of an external threat gave rise to a phenomenon of rumors in society. When people saw a strange, windowless grey train rushing past a small station at high speed, guarded by armed soldiers on its platforms, the public imagination instantly filled in underground bunkers, alien technologies, and secret orders from the leaders. The Soviet person, accustomed to living under the whispers of communal kitchens and reading between the lines in the newspaper Pravda, refused to believe in simple explanations. But the greatest tragedy of the BZhRK Molodets unfolded not during the Cold War years, but after its end. In the late 80s and early 90s, the world's geopolitical map was rapidly redrawn. Perestroika, the era of shortages, the parade of sovereignties, and the subsequent collapse of the great and terrible Soviet Union put an end to many ambitious military projects. In 1993, Russian President Boris Yeltsin and US President George H.W. Bush signed the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, START II, and it was the BZhRK Molodets that became the main, non-negotiable condition for the American side. The Pentagon agreed to many concessions, but demanded one thing: the Soviet nuclear trains had to be destroyed completely and irrevocably. The Americans remembered all too well that sticky fear they felt before the invisible steel ghosts roaming the expanses of Eurasia. The process of disposing of the Molodets looked like a grim and dramatic culmination of this entire story. At the Bryansk Repair and Mechanical Plant, under the strict control of American inspectors and video cameras, the unique railcars, created by the genius of the Utkin brothers and the labor of hundreds of thousands of Soviet workers, were cut into scrap metal by giant torches and shears. The unique missiles were decommissioned, and their solid fuel engines awaited their fate. This spectacle caused real pain in those who created this system and served on it. Masterpieces of engineering thought were turned into piles of rusty scrap. Only a few have survived to this day. One of the missile rear cars and the locomotive of the BZhRK can be seen today at the Museum of Russian Railways in St. Petersburg. Another complex is located at the Technical Museum in Tolyatti. They stand on dead-end sidings, silent, cold steel giants that have become monuments to a bygone era, when red flags flew over the Kremlin and the cogs of the great Soviet war machine made the whole world tremble. The history of the BZhRK Molodets is not just a story about missiles, trains, and secret technologies. It is a concentrated mirror of the entire Soviet civilization. In it, the highest flight of human genius, capable of cheating the laws of physics, intertwined with the tragedy of a system that expended colossal resources preparing for a war it never had to start. It is a story about people who believed they were protecting the peaceful sky over their motherland, and about the ambitions of a superpower seeking an absolute deterrent weapon. Was the Molodets combat railway missile complex the highest triumph of Soviet engineering thought, which saved the planet from World War III by creating a balance of fear? Or was it an insanely expensive, infrastructure-destroying adventure that undermined the already weak economic health of the late USSR? Official historians, military experts, and conspiracy theorists are still arguing about this. And what do you think, comrades? Was this structure a justified shield for the motherland, or a fatal mistake by the Soviet leadership? Which version is closer to you, the dry logic of documents or the intriguing secrets of spy archives? Write your opinion in the comments. Let's have a real historical discussion. Be sure to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss our new investigations and declassified materials from the darkest labyrinths of history. Until next time, comrades!